light of the world. You step down into darkness, open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Comely you came to the earth you created, all for the sake we came for. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether
Hi, I'm Kathy Stout, and I'm the director of the Weekday Children's Ministries here at Union Baptist Church. I'm here to give you an update on our new Child Enrichment Center we are so excited about. As you can see, the picture of the building is being constructed in the back now. Please be in prayer for this construction and for the ministry. We are now accepting enrollment for children ages 6 weeks through pre-K, full-time child care ministry program. So go to the church website at discoverunion.org or call the church office at 865-687-4500 for more information. Thank you.
Luke chapter 7 this morning. Luke chapter 7. We're going to talk about weathering the waves of disappointment. We've all been disappointed. Maybe you've heard someone say this: just play the cards you were dealt and forget it. Or, you know what? Life is just tough. Just get over it. Maybe somebody say this: this is your lot in life. Or the spiritual answer is, this must be God's will for you. Every day brings many opportunities of disappointment. We can all look back somewhere in our life and reflect upon some disappointment that we've experienced. To say that we've all faced new disappointments and few disappointments, it's just an undisputable fact. We've all faced those. But what does it mean to be disappointed? Webster defines disappointment as this: failing to meet the expectation of or hope of something. It's being frustrated with an event in your life, or with somebody in your life, or with something in your life. To be disappointed is to be defeated in expectation. You were expecting this, but you got this. So when we say that something is disappointing, what we're saying is that it failed to meet our expectations. So today, I want us to understand how disappointment works by looking, first of all, at 3 case studies right here in Luke chapter 7. And then we're going to see how disappointment affects us right where we are, and then how we can deal with disappointment in our own life. How we can deal with this disappointment. So first of all, I want you to see 3 case studies in disappointment. Three different scenarios from Luke chapter 7 that are all placed there to reveal how Jesus interacts with people who were disappointed. The first one is the centurion's servant. The centurion's servant. Look in chapter 7, verse 1. Now when he concluded all these sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. And so when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving. For he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue, that the centurion they're talking about. Then Jesus went with them. And when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. And so when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, I have not found such a great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well, who had been sick. We have this picture of Jesus going into a little town called Capernaum, and he's learning about this sick servant. A certain Roman centurion, what's a centurion? It's a soldier that has about 600 men under him, so he has lots of authority. The Bible says this, the centurion loved his servant, and the servant was about to die. It was a huge disappointment. And so the centurion heard about Jesus and sent some of the elders of the Jews to ask him to come and heal the servant. Now, evidently, this centurion was wealthy and powerful because he built a synagogue himself. He paid for a synagogue there in Capernaum. And these elders realized this guy has some authority, this guy means something to our lives, let's do what he asks. And so they go find Jesus. And Jesus didn't even pause. But immediately he went with the elders toward the centurion's home. And as Jesus approached, word was sent that the centurion said, I'm not even worthy for you to come to my home. Don't come. Don't come. I'm not worthy. As a matter of fact, I'm not even worthy to stand in the presence of Jesus, is what he was saying. And so, remember who's saying this. A Roman soldier, a pagan, a Gentile soldier who was occupying the land of Israel, whom the Jews did not like one bit. And so, verse 7, he asked Jesus, just say the word. If you'll just say the word, this servant will be healed. And so this amazes Christ. And without going one step further, he makes this statement that this soldier had more faith than Jesus' own people. It's pretty scary. You mean the people that God came and spoke to personally? You mean the people that God rescued from Egypt? You mean the people that God over and over and time again saved? Yes, those people. And so in verse 10, we see the servant was instantly healed. Jesus didn't have to go there. Jesus didn't have to say a word about it. He just healed him. He just healed him. And so this centurion was amazed. Here's what Jesus saw. Jesus saw faith. The centurion didn't see Jesus himself. Did you catch that? He never saw Jesus. But he believed he could heal his servant. And so the faith of this non-believer put to shame the faith of the Jews. Oftentimes Jesus responds when we least expect him to. Let me ask you this question. Does faith matter? Does faith matter in your life? It should. Somebody who knows Jesus and trusts Jesus to do what he wants. Now listen, God does it in his own timing. Faith is not saying, God, I want it now, and I call it down from heaven now, like we saw last week with the prosperity gospel. I want it here, and I want it now. That's not what faith is. Faith says, God, you do it in your timing, you do it in your way. And so this man says to Jesus, Jesus, you don't have to even come here. Just say the word, and he'll be healed. The second scenario is the widow at Nain. Now, we talked about her a few weeks ago in Timothy when we were talking about widows, but look what the story is in verse 11. Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd, the audience. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. And then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. Jesus enters a city called Nain. You don't hear about this city very often, but his disciples are with him. A large crowd is with him, and there he encounters a funeral procession. Now, there have been a lot of memorable funeral processions that you've remembered, that you've seen. JFK's procession, Elvis's procession. I'll never forget watching Princess Diana's procession where they were throwing flowers, and people just kept throwing flowers and flowers. Maybe some of you remember Abraham Lincoln's procession. Anyway, there's a lot of funeral processions that go on. They're all memorable, but they're not as memorable as this one. We don't see any record of Jesus asking who this was. Who is this boy? Who is this young man? We don't see that. We don't see what happened to him, how he died. We don't see any circumstances surrounding that. But we do see an explanation because Jesus already knew who this man was, how this man died, and why this man died. He knew his mother was a widow, and this was her only child, and her only one who was going to bring extreme hardship upon her because she relied upon her husband's income, and her husband had died. She was a widow, so she was relying upon her son's income, and now he's dead. What am I going to do? You talk about disappointment. Death brings major disappointment, doesn't it? It doesn't matter if it's sudden or if it's imminent. Losing a loved one is a tragedy, almost overbearing disappointment. So Jesus knew the story, and he spots the mother. This is one of my favorite stories. I would love to have been there as Jesus is standing there watching, and here comes the procession. He spots the mother. He approaches her with compassion, and he says the line that you and I have said to people all the time: don't cry. Stop crying. And we can't back it up. Jesus says to her, do not weep. Now he can back it up. He's about to say to her, don't cry, because what I'm about to do. Your tears are going to be turned from weeping to joy. He stops the procession, gets close to it. The open coffin is there. Don't miss this. Jews were not to touch open coffins. They were not to be around dead bodies. As a matter of fact, some historians say that the Jews were so adamant about that, they would hire pallbearers who weren't Jews to carry the dead body to bury it before sundown. And so here's what Jesus does. He doesn't just see the son. He doesn't just go to the son. He touches the open coffin. And he basically says this, young man, get out of there. Can you imagine? Now, most every person in this room has grieved at a funeral. But imagine you're sitting at a funeral and the Messiah himself walks in, walks up to the open casket. He commands our dead loved ones to get up. It would be phenomenal. It would be amazing. It did happen to a widow in a place called Nain. How? How'd that happen? It was a miracle. It was Jesus. Jesus was showing the people, I can bring life back to the dead. What's the response of the dead young man? It's the response that everything that is dead when Jesus imparts life. He moved. That's what he did. When Jesus brings life, we move. We change. Not only that, he got up. Not only that, he spoke to his mama. Jesus presented him to his mother. Now, the folks down at Stevens and Minets would have a fit if this happened, wouldn't they? He presents his formerly dead corpse fully alive to his mother, and the mother's weeping fades. Her disappointment is gone. The disappointment of death was changed into the delight of life, and the people around were in awe and realized really who Jesus was. Verse 16, again, then fear came upon all. And they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. Jesus saw the extreme sorrow. What did he do? He responds. Does that mean he will bring our dead back to life? Well, not yet. But one day he will. One day he will. One day he will bring those dead bodies in the cemeteries back to life. This is just a precursor. This is just a prelude of what's going to happen at his second coming. But not yet. And so we're going to have to endure the disappointment of death in our own lives. But we know Jesus is there no matter what you go through, guiding our endurance, comforting our pain, because he's a God of compassion. The third case study is a little bit odd. It changes direction to John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer. Look at verse 18. Then the disciples of John reported to him concerning all these things. So the disciples go back to John and say, you ought to see what Jesus is doing. And John, calling two of his disciples to him, sent them back to Jesus, saying, are you the coming one, or do we look for another? What kind of a question is that? John is Jesus' cousin. John saw all kinds of things going on. John baptized the Messiah. John told us, look, here's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Why is he asking a question like that? Maybe he was like most Jews. They were puzzled because they thought the Messiah was coming not just to be a good spiritual leader, but to reign as King of Kings. They expected him to come in, destroy the Roman rule, to set up his earthly kingdom. Instead, Jesus was spending most of his time teaching and healing. And so John says, are you the one, or are we waiting on somebody else? Now, we've all doubted in our Christian walk. And so John's trying to figure out what's going on. And so he wants some clarification. Is there another one coming? What's going on? So verse 21, look what happens. That very hour, he, Jesus, cured many of infirmities, afflictions, and evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. It was ironic what Jesus was doing when the messengers of John showed up. Look at Jesus' response to the question in verse 22. Jesus answered and said to them, go and tell John the things that you have seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached to them, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. He was doing what he came to earth to do, to show the power of God before he died. Jesus knew John was suffering for the truth. Not too long after that, John's head was removed because he was telling the gospel truth. You may be suffering for the truth. John was faithfully following Jesus, and he faced disappointment. Does following Jesus mean we don't sometimes doubt him or feel the sting of disappointment? Not at all. Even the strongest believer feels disappointment from time to time. And so now I want us to focus on disappointment in our life. Disappointment in your life, in my life. They show up in different ways. One way is they show up as a big shock. It's a big shock. These are disappointments that you and I face that come to us seemingly out of nowhere. Sudden, traumatic, and devastating. Something has dashed our hopes and dreams. A rejection by a friend or a spouse, loss of a job, death of a loved one. Maybe you've experienced a big shock disappointment in your life. Maybe you're going through one right now. Other disappointments aren't big shocks, but they're more like emotional arthritis. By that, I mean this: they're chronic, they're ongoing, they're persistent, and they seemingly are designed to wear us down. Loneliness, for example, or injustice, or the difficult circumstance such as a physical or emotional illness. It's never going to change. and it's wearing you down. And then there's the nagging disappointments. What are those? Daily living. The car breaks down. You pull a muscle. Vacation gets canceled because the kids are sick. We all go through that. But no matter what level we're on, the question is this: how can we deal with disappointment? How can we find some sense of peace and comfort whether disappointment we face is shock level, emotional arthritis level, or a nagging level? I'm convinced that disappointment is a key motivating factor in almost every person's behavior, and few ever realize it. So we'd better learn how to deal with disappointment. Let me start out by reminding you of a few observations about how life works in the real world. Here's an observation. I want you to write this down. There is always some level of disappointment in your life. There will always be some level of disappointment in your life, even in the best of circumstances. You're always going to have some level of disappointment. I want you to think about the best situations in your life and see if this isn't true. Something will always pull us down from our mountaintop experience. Second observation is this: circumstances are rarely at their best. Circumstances in life are rarely at their best. You know it's true. Here's what I mean. Your boss is never satisfied. Your employees don't give you the best effort. Your friends forget to call you like they promised. There's traffic jam on the way home from work. You struggle to get in harmony with your spouse. Everywhere we look, there's a significant gap between what ought to be and what is. And day by day, hour by hour, that gap causes significant disappointment. But it gets worse. Observation number 3 is this: life is often blatantly unfair. Life is often blatantly unfair. It's not a case of things just not being at their best. We're talking about the deck being stacked against you for no apparent reason. A weather disaster. A business still gone sour. A rough childhood. Physical and emotional abuse. Physical and emotional sickness. A lot of times, life is just blatantly unfair. The writer of Ecclesiastes, if you didn't understand before, clears it up. Listen to what he says. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or to the wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no man knows when his hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so men are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. Ecclesiastes 9, 11, and 12. So, there's disappointment even in the best circumstances of life, even in marriage. A young couple gets married and they think everything's going to be hunky-dory, and it doesn't work that way, does it? Circumstances are rarely at their best, and life is just unfair sometimes. So we have to live with this constant level of pain. We have to live with this constant level of pain in our hearts, in our lives. We've got to be able to deal with it. So day after day, this disappointment comes, and eventually it takes its toll. It's not just personal disappointment. It could be the difficulties of people we love and know, and that ripple effect comes into our life. They're hurting, and it hurts us. They're going through some struggle, and we are there with them. The stuff on the news, war, terrorism, natural disasters, grief, heartache, pain, all on this massive scale, it affects us. A school shooting should affect you. And all these things and more tell us there's something terribly wrong with the world, and because of that, we suffer for it. And so the realization led, again, the writer of Ecclesiastes to say this. Now, here's his conclusion. This is not very encouraging. He says this: meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? Nothing we do is going to make things better. And so most of us try to figure out a way to deal with the pain of disappointment. Here's what we do. Some people choose to deny the pain. They just pretend it's not there, pretend it'll go away. They pretend everything is okay. That they don't think about the gap between what ought to be and what is in marriage. And so like the song says, don't worry, just be happy. But people choose this path eventually to become as shallow as that song was. They never go deeper than surface level issues because to go under the surface is just too scary. It's just too hard, and so they don't want to do it. Maybe you're heading for disaster because you keep pretending in your life everything's okay, everything's going to turn out okay, and so you begin to deny the pain, and it's not going to be okay. If you keep that level up, you'll become little more than a plastic person who says all the right things on the outside and fall apart on the inside. You need a better strategy. Some people try to ease the pain. Not just deny it, they try to ease it. They're aware of that gap between what is and what ought to be, and so they see it in the world and they experience it personally and it hurts them, and so they try to drown it in pleasurable activities. They think, life is so hard, I deserve a little relief. Here's how it works. Feel a little pain, had a rough day at work, your wife's neglecting you, reach for something to eat. Some people and some men would never dream of running around on their wife. But many are having an affair with Sarah Lee and Little Debbie and Wendy's because they're so focused on food, trying to ease the pain. Some people reach for a six-pack. Some people search for something pornographic. Some people go on a shopping spree, do whatever it takes to escape the reality that the misery in life, if I can just escape it for a little while. It's not hard to tell where that leads, is it? Disappointment is a daily occurrence. This strategy risks addiction. And so people are addicted to food. People are addicted to pornography. People are addicted to this and that and the other. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pleasure and enjoying good things that God's created. But whenever you start telling yourself that you deserve some pleasure that you know is going to hurt you in the end because your life is hard, you're in trouble. That's addictive thinking. And so that's what the road some of you are on maybe this morning, but you need a better strategy. Here's somebody else. Some people blame the pain on somebody else. They deny it, but some blame it. They see the gap between what ought to be and what is, and they say to themselves, somebody is going to pay. And you know that scenario. As a matter of fact, everybody around them is going to pay. Because they're bitter, they're angry, and they just spew out their anger and bitterness all over people, and even towards God. And so they have to blame somebody. That's where some of you may be this morning, and it's the dangerous place of all. You need a better strategy. There is a better strategy. As we close, let me give you God's strategy today. How to cope with disappointment. How do you deal with it? The Apostle Paul knew a little bit about disappointment. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, he says this, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. While it is true that we face disappointments, we have to learn to handle them.